So what I want to share with you tonight is basically the evolution of campus up through the 70s and 80s. I kind of stop right there. Andy Ford's presidency was a huge building administration. But I thought I would take us back to the part that maybe everyone is not so familiar with. So looking at this first picture, this is a picture of the chapel when it was brand new. And in the upper left, there is the first sign that ever went up on the corner. And it says Wabash College, founded in 1832, a liberal arts college for men. And that's what it says. It was put there actually through the efforts of Byron Trippett when he was dean. The Indianapolis Alumni Association was disgusted at how ratty the corner looked. And so Trippett was charged to dress it up. And that sign was his answer to it. Let's see. This next slide kind of tells us a little bit about Wabash and why we're here in Crawfordsville. One of the first questions that I got as archivist is, why are we Wabash College? We're not in Wabash, Indiana. We don't sit on the river. And the simple reason is we were given land in this location. Crawfordsville was a land office town, and that was a huge part of our early success as a town. And Williamson Dunn, who was a Presbyterian, actually made his home in Madison, Indiana, but was registrar of the land office here, and so gave Wabash 15 acres on which to start their new venture. And you can see here on this map, I have an arrow and a star. The star is the site of the kneeling in the snow, the site of the first college. There's a marker on the corner down there. It's about 6 blocks north of campus, really overlooks that Sugar Creek Valley. And the founding meeting house was on West Wabash, roughly where the Donnelly's parking lot sits today. In fact, 15 acres turned out to be not quite big enough for the dreams these young men had. And so in 1835, they bought 160 acres, which is a quarter of a section. They immediately sold off 100 of those acres, and the profit paid for the construction of the first building. There's a very small picture of it down about halfway in the map. This first building on the new campus was originally just known as the college because it contained everything about Wabash College, but where it was built is on the site of where Baxter sits now, so that we can see that College Street actually was the street to the college. Caleb Mills' house is still in its original location, and early faculty, because we had this land and not a lot of money, some of the early faculty were actually paid in grants of land from the college. One other quick thing about this map, which is actually an 1864 map, you'll see that Wabash Avenue is labeled as South Street, Grant Avenue labeled as West. Those are the street names for the original plat of the city of Crawfordsville. West Street later renamed Grant Avenue after President Grant. The next slide tells us a little bit about tragedy. So they had this beautiful 4-story building, which was, the largest, grandest building really for miles around anywhere in the area. And it was the whole of the college, was known as the college. It contained not only dormitories, but also classrooms, a chapel, a library, and various study rooms. Just as they were nearing completion of the building, they were finishing work on the north section. the building caught fire. Now, the building was a special construction, and it had solid brick walls that ran up between, there were 3 divisions. So there were 2 solid brick walls that ran from the attic all the way to the basement. And in this way, brick building said to be fireproof. Of course, anyway, so no insurance on it, but it was quite a damaging fire. There were some students who had already moved into the dormitories. No students were injured in the fire. And of course, Caleb Mills, man of action, led a bucket brigade to help put it out. They lost in an all total, losses were in the $18,000 range, as they had, basically begged, borrowed, and secured money from every possible avenue. $18,000 was a huge loss, and really it was thought it might be the end of the college. But they started fundraising right that night. The first thing they did was they went to the town of Crawfordsville and put before them, what they were trying to accomplish and the losses. And the town of Crawfordsville actually paid over money that they had been gathering to found a women's college in Crawfordsville. It is for this generous donation that in 1982, a plaque was put on the mall site of Baxter, thanking the citizens of Crawfordsville for their support. That didn't raise all the money they needed, but at least it was a start. And this is a lithograph from 1857. So what the college looked like at that point. And what we're seeing here is the building I was just calling the college. We later came to be known as South Hall. That's on the left, and Center Hall on the right. So this picture is made from approximately, if you were standing perhaps in front of modern day Martindale. So from the Arboretum side. Center Hall looks odd to us because it has no wings yet. Those didn't come along until a good bit after the Civil War. So after the campus moved to its current location, Caleb Mills bought the original college site and moved the little frame building that had served as the first campus to this campus. And of course, that's the Forrest Hall we know today. What's interesting is Forrest, as the first college building, was frame building simply because they could not afford bricks, and the framed wood was so much cheaper. Caleb Mills, on this land that he had, also platted a cemetery, and this Mills Cemetery, approximately where the Trippett Hall parking lot is now, so kind of on that Pike Street side of campus. It was closed in the 1870s when Oak Hill Cemetery opened, and all the people in Mills Cemetery were moved to Oak Hill, which has a lovely Wabash section. If you've never spent any quiet time out there on a visit to Crawfordsville, I would commend it. It is really lovely out there. So here we have Caleb Mills and his son, Benjamin Marshall Mills. Now you'll see on this little snippet of a map I've got prominently Marshall Street. So this would be the street that runs kind of at the end of the Phi block, sort of across from the new Sigma Chi house. And that street is named Marshall because that was the road to Caleb Mills Cemetery, where his son Marshall was originally buried. Marshall served in the Civil War, had been a student at Wabash, left to serve, came back to Wabash, finished his education, and was studying to be a doctor when he died in 1869. From what I understand, likely a lingering case of tuberculosis picked up in the war. This is a cutout from the Atlas of 1878, and we can see here on Caleb Mills' property, it's showing a lot of little trees. Those would have been Caleb Mills' orchard. He was quite a horticulturalist, and in fact developed some kind of special storage method to keep his apples just as fresh as could be. It is said he finished every day with a baked apple. The other thing on this map of interest is called Forest Home. That's actually Forest Hall, sitting where the Sparks Center sits now. And what's called the gymnasium was actually originally built as the Polytechnic, and we'll get to that later. A couple of other things to point out is that now we have this normal building is the building we might know as Kingery. These were the outhouses for the college, an area also known as Little Egypt for reasons I don't quite understand at this thing. By the 1870s, you see, we are getting into almost a modern view of campus, or certainly more modern. Starting at the left on this slide, we see that we have now sold the right-of-way to the railroad coming there by Old Kingery. This was done to cover a significant budget deficit early times. The next square over is a baseball diamond. So we see we have baseball now on campus. So athletics, organized athletics have come to town. And next over is the Polytechnic Gymnasium, built originally as military training. The next over is South Hall, which we've already discussed. And then now we see Center Hall has gotten its wings. So it is now complete as we know it. And the last building on the right is Peck Hall of Sciences, which was given money given to the college by David Peck, who was a trustee, was from Indianapolis. Perhaps his more important connection is he married the sister of our founders, Nancy Thompson. So she, you know, did her part to help the college as well. And here we are a little closer in on those buildings, so you can just kind of get a better look at it. I will say, just to flip back real quickly, this is an interesting perspective. And as you can see, it's quite high up. And you know, nowadays you would get this perspective maybe if you were standing on the roof of the Fine Arts Center. In the 1870s, there was a grain elevator on that spot. And so I'm sure the artist climbed up to the top of the elevator and sat there and was able to make his picture of our campus. This is the Polytechnic Gymnasium, which I had mentioned earlier. After the Civil War, the United States instituted a program of training for college students to be military officers if the need should arise again. It was thought at the time of the Civil War that perhaps we didn't have sufficient numbers of men who could be officers. And so they instituted this program of military training across America. I guess maybe an equivalent today might be something like ROTC. Wabash had an instance of this as well. And our commander was Colonel H.B. Carrington, who had seen a good bit of service in the West. And this was a completely government funded position. He was the professor of military science. And so the top picture is the Polytechnic as it was originally built. And then the lower picture is a kind of a, has been a bit upgraded, but I don't know if you can see this on the across the Zoom, but out in front of that building are cannons used for drilling. And because they didn't have horses enough to pull the cannons, students were pressed into service. And so they would take turns being either the person shooting the cannon or the mule pulling the cannon. And this led to a spot of trouble when future Vice President Thomas Riley Marshall and some of his boys decided they had it with this military training, dragging these cannons around. So they loaded the cannons as full as they could and put them on the railroad tracks there that we just saw. When the train came along, imploring the students, move those cannons, move, those students weren't about to. So the workers on the train and the passengers did it themselves. The next morning, Marshall and his cohorts were called before the faculty and asked to account for themselves. And Marshall noted that his father had sent him to Wabash to become less mulish rather than more. And evidently this excuse worked. He and all of his friends graduated, and that was seemingly mostly the end of the military training program. This is a picture of Center Hall from 1878. So far as I know, it is the oldest known photo that we have of the building as finished. What this picture actually came from a very small, probably 2 inches tall, about 3.5 inches wide, picture on a piece of paper that was inside, stuck up under a paperweight. And it was not adhered well and came off. So scanned it at a very high resolution. And in fact, you can almost see the fibers of the paper in that image, but because it was such an early image, it was worth the try. And center as finished. So we have here, this slide is about the north wing, and the first floor was the library, which you see on the upper right, 16 feet tall ceilings. Each floor, you can see a little on the left, there were alcoves in the library, each they would be kind of curated collections. And, one way they were raising money for books was you could sponsor an alcove. In other words, you would have, so many shelf feet of books which you could buy, and then it would forevermore be, the Swift alcove. We still have a number of books with book plates in them, denoting various donors for the alcoves. This space is today the business office. What's interesting, the little red square in the picture is highlighting a lithograph of Abraham Lincoln, which still lives in Center Hall today, hangs over Sherry Ross's shoulder in the dean's offices. That's a kind of a fun connection. And so a few years ago, they were renovating the business office and had demolished, taken everything out of it. And it was during the summer. So I just slipped over and poked my head in the door just to see, the structure's still there. It's all up there. But yeah, much higher use today as a business office. The picture in the lower left is of the chapel that was on the second floor. This space now houses the offices of religion, philosophy, and religion. And the little Tuttle Chapel that's up there on the second floor. So this was where mandatory chapel was held every day. And if we can see right here at the back, there's a sort of a stage area, and this dark line across the top, there's a string of lighting. And I was lucky enough to go into a closet at the end of the hall in one of the offices. And if you open that closet door and look up, that stage is still there. Same thing, superstructure, all still there, but now houses offices for the faculty. This is Peck Hall of Science, as I mentioned, given by Trustee Peck, and was the home to chemistry, natural philosophy, as it was known then. Today we call it physics. Also built at the same time was a power plant to power the machines they used in the physics department. There we go. So John Lyle Campbell, Wabash man, I want to say class of 1848, I think. At any rate, he was secretary of the 1876 Centennial Exhibition, call it a World's Fair, in Philadelphia. And it was huge and went on for months. And as this, he had the chance to see kind of all the major new inventions that America had to offer. Among those was Edison's electric light. And after he returned to Wabash, he gave a demonstration of electric light. They hung a light in the Arboretum and powered it a little generator. The light was so bright that a newspaper could be read on Walnut Street. So if we're in the Arboretum, Walnut Street is the street that runs between Kappa Sig and the Fidelt House. So quite a lot of light, quite far away. So the power plant really was built, and this tells us certainly that the mall was the backyard of our campus. Remember, we have the outhouses back there. Now we have the power plant back there, and it was directly west of Peck Hall, and it was used to generate the electricity that powered the physics gizmos in Peck. The power plant was moved in the early 1920s and the ground leveled. Based on this photo and some other photos that we have, and looking, because they tend to be long shots, you could see across Wabash Avenue, and kind of based on where the houses are, essentially the power plant was about where the flagpole is today. So as I walk by the flagpole, I often think about that. It was in the 1920s that they moved it to where it is now. This is Forest Hall and the Hovey Homestead. So Forest Hall, again, that first campus building, Caleb Mills had it taken apart and moved to his land here on campus and gave it to the college in the 1870s. He also offered them the land of his cemetery. They said no thanks to the cemetery, but yes, please to Forest Hall. We're all glad for that. The home on the lower right, of course, is the Hovey Homestead. We call it now the Hovey Cottage. It was built right on Wabash Avenue, looking over to, well, right where Kane House is. In fact, Hovey was moved to build Kane House as a home for President Kane. It was a donor-elect of Thornton who thought that President Kane ought to have a house befitting a college president, and so she had one built for him. And here is South Hall again, the original college. And the picture on the left is also from the 1870s and the earliest photograph that we have. We have a drawing of the original college building, but this is the earliest photograph. What we see in the lower right is what South Hall became after a couple of major alterations. The first was done by that Henry B. Carrington, who designed and built the Polytechnic. He took South Hall, had originally been built as 4 floors. He reduced it to 2 floors. And in the late 50s, the college was studying whether or not we might be able to turn South Hall into our new library. Early 50s, I'm sorry, into our new library. They had a structural analysis done, and it was discovered that these alterations had so damaged the structure it was not safe to rehabilitate. And so it was at that point demolished, and that's where, of course, Baxter Hall was built. This is a picture inside the Hovey Museum. And if you'll note the little orange picture upper right, that's the Polytechnic. And it was until the military program ended. And then it was used as a sort of a fitness gym, rings and pommel horses, that sort of thing. But there was a bigger space crunch, and that was happening over in Center Hall. In the south wing, that area that occupies the dean and the registrar's office now was all one big classroom. But as it contained the entirety of the Hovey collection of minerals, fossils, plants, all sorts, it was too crowded for teaching. And so John Merle Coulter, fascinating fellow in his own right, who was teaching here at the time, moved the collections all to the Polytechnic, and they rechristened it the Hovey Museum, named for Edmund O. Hovey, who taught geology in the beginning at Wabash. Here's some more shots inside that Hovey Museum. In the upper right, the blue cyanotype, that is the office of Mason B. Thomas, taken, some may recall Mason B. Thomas, the maker of men. And he was the maker of men simply because of the large number of students he sent out to graduate programs and to become botanists and zoologists. He really was quite inspirational. The picture on upper left is obviously up in the top floor, and that was the room that was used for dissections and study work by students. This picture down here in the lower left was a kind of a library for the department and the graduate student lounge. At this time in the 1890s and into just barely into the early 1900s, Wabash would offer an earned PhD, and certainly we were giving master's degrees as well. So here we have it. This is the same building, and it is, yeah, Polytechnic Museum, now Assembly Hall. And this is what it looked like, all dressed up for President Kane's inauguration in February of 1900, and marked the first public performance of Old Wabash, which was instantly a big hit with the students, and calls were put out that every student needs to learn Old Wabash, and pretty much still do today. One other thing before we leave this slide, just so we can get a feel for it. This was Wabash's gymnasium when basketball came to Indiana. And as you can see with those poles down, down each side of the room, not really conducive to basketball. So all of our games really until, I want to say 1916, what would have been a home game would have been played at the YMCA here in Crawfordsville in their gymnasium. This picture I like just because it's just a little wild. And what we're doing is we're looking down the road is to the left and looking out at Wabash Avenue in the 1890s. When I see this picture, I think of the joke that went around about how, saving money, we would mow, 3 times a year, once right before classes started, and once at commencement, and once in the summer if we had to. And here we have, now we're up to the 1890s, and we have Yandy's Library, which students today know it as Detchen Hall. That name change happened in the early 90s. What I love about this picture is this pathway going here. And of course, that's the same path that we still use today. I always like to see things that are still in use. Here we have some pictures of the inside of Yandy's Hall, which was a gift of Simon Yandy's, who was from Indianapolis and a trustee of the college. So this picture on the lower right was as second floor reading room. Lots of natural light in there. Picture lower left is first floor reading room. And the larger picture gives us a chance to see the stacks. So there's an area on campus today. We use it a lot of times. We'll use it in Detchen for, it's the place where we'll have a banquet or a meeting or something. And that area was actually the stacks for the library. And at the very top of those stacks was a sunroof. To let light down into the stacks of the library. And on the wall here, these are championship banners for our football teams, long since lost, misplaced. Anyway, they're sad. Here we have tennis in the Arboretum. So each fraternity had its own court, and one for the independents and one just for the faculty. Picture on the bottom left, again, I wonder how well you can see that over Zoom, but it is the area just east of the main door of Center Hall, and looking out to the northeast. And we can see in the little red square, there's a tennis court. So the students would come, and as soon as they would arrive on campus, one of the first things they would do is clear off and spiff up their tennis courts. And this picture in the upper left are, these pictures came from the Kingery family, and it shows them on the faculty court with, of course, their house, Kingery, in the background. Professor Kingery taught Latin. Not far from this area, in fact, very near it, is the place where we would have Greek plays, about where Martindale is now. These were the brainchild of Daniel Dickey Haynes, Wabash man of 1895. He was a member of faculty in classics and taught from when he graduated until 1916. And he and his wife would make all of the costumes, everything as authentic as they could get it, even down to rope sandals for each of the actors. And local man, Fred Vance, painted these backdrops that you see. The Greek plays would be performed during commencement week, and then sometimes also taken out to other places over the summer, maybe to a Chautauqua, perhaps a gathering of YMCA students at Winona Lake as well. In the little red box here, just to give you an idea exactly where this was, this is the railroad track running there right behind it. And these were really quite well done. Received amazing reviews, not just from students. This is Mills Place, and upper left, we have Caleb Mills' house as it looked in the 1890s. Pretty ratty, as a matter of fact, but in the 1920s, the home was gifted to the college, and that was the home of the president until Ike Elston gave the Elston homestead for the use of the college. And picture on the lower right is just Caleb Mills' house and the neighbors as you walk along to where the library would later be built. This is the corner at various times. The shot on the left is the 1920s. I love it because you can see the Poston Brick Street. Poston was a Crawfordsville Brick Company, sold their bricks, I think, worldwide. And here we see the Wabash Avenue entrance during the World War II era. And here we have what some folks might call the senior bench. It is more appropriately the Thompson Memorial Bench. And if you could see under all the layers of paint, as we can in this photo, you would see the names of various Thompsons who were founders and early members of the faculty. And this was given by a family member of the Thompsons. I know that this is fall of 1916, although there were no dates on this picture. But if we look at the fellow here on the far right, he is reading something quite distinctive, and that is the Wabash magazine issue for fall of 1916. There never was another magazine cover like it. That makes it pretty helpful to date. And this is the junior fence. Unless you were here prior to World War II, you might not know about the junior fence, but it was located right between Center Hall, North Wing, and Peck Hall, which was taken down to build WA. So what we're doing is we're looking into the mall. We can see on the right, there is the first structure we see on the right is the power plant that I mentioned earlier. And then on left are two houses that were taken down, removed to build the Sparks Center. And far left, we can just see a little bit of a white structure, and that was Forest Hall and its first location on this campus. This is the architect's sketch of the armory as designed and then built. It's kind of neat. The two figures there are, on the left is the architect and on the right is President McIntosh. And upper right, I have a photo of the armory as it's being built. I just love that picture. Here's some more of construction from the Wabash magazine of 1916. And what we're seeing right here, this funny little building, that was the remnant of the Hovey Museum, just a remnant of it, that they were using, I think, for a construction shed during the building of the gym and the armory. And just take a minute here to say that it was called the Armory. That was simply a name because as it came online, we were just headed for World War I, and it was thought it might possibly have a military purpose. And so it was called an armory. It turns out they were correct, although there have never, there are no guns in the armory. Here we have some pictures of the new gym and the armory as built. This is commencement. And of course, this is the basketball floor. Now, what you're looking at is a dirt floor that they had wood sections for that they could put on for a basketball game or for commencement. And also we see that the gym had pretty spectacular skylights. Up on the second floor was the auxiliary gym, which was used as a mess hall during World War I and used as the chapel. In the early 20s, when the chapel in Center Hall that we saw before was not big enough to house the greatly expanded student body, which ran to 500 students at that time. And they like to think of themselves collectively as the hell-roaring 500. These are just some other shots of the armory and a little snippet from The Bachelor talking about putting in a new hard maple floor with a concrete base in 1919. Come World War I, Wabash had a unit of the Student Army Training Corps. So, you know, at the time America came into World War I, England had been in war for quite a long time. And there was a thing you commonly hear of, it's called the lost generation. You know, maybe all the men from a small town might have perished in the war. They would go in, you know, all in groups together. And just a tremendous loss of life in England. The United States hoped to avoid that, and yet young men of a certain age were, you know, out to join up right away. And so it was thought that if they could create a hybrid program where they could enlist in the Army, but also attend college at the same time, that for one, it would, you know, keep the numbers reasonable and give these young men a way to support the war effort without the chance of losing an entire generation to the war. So here are the barracks, and they were built right where the chapel is right now. If we look, we can see right here at the left a building looming, and that is that South Hall, now the site of Baxter, if that gives you a kind of a sense of their location. And here we have it, sure enough, mess hall in the armory, and that's that auxiliary gymnasium. We can see the backboard right there. You know, all these young men, so they both enrolled in college, enlisted in the Army. The Army paid them a stipend, provided their all their clothing and their meals and housing as well. Among these young men, somewhere in here is as a man who would have a tremendous impact on the Second War. And his name is Andrew Jackson Moyer. And he, in World War II, as Hitler picked up the bombing, the Battle of Britain, as it's known, the air bombardment of England, a number of treasures from England were moved to other places, valuable artwork down into caves in Wales, you know, children into the country. A number of things were sent to Canada. And as we know, we've all heard, you know, in our little history books in elementary school, Alexander Fleming discovered antibiotics, and that is true. He discovered the power of antibiotics to fight a bacterial infection. What he couldn't do was really create enough quantity to effectively, you know, treat more than one small scratch or spot. I mean, just not quantity enough to offer it as a medicine to the public, certainly. That research came to a USDA lab in Champaign-Urbana, where Wabash man Moyer was working, and it was his job to find new uses for the waste from corn products. Corn steep liquor was what he worked with. So when the antibiotic research came there, He pretty quickly figured out how to grow it and feed it on this corn waste material. And then, and patented several stirring techniques. Anyway, what he did there enabled antibiotics to be in widespread circulation by the time of the D-Day invasion, which I'm sure saved thousands of lives. And, in ways that we can more fully appreciate now than we perhaps had done, it was the Spanish flu that came to Wabash. The troops were all sworn in. They took an oath. All the SATC units across America were sworn in at the same time on October the 1st, 1918. 6 days later, influenza hits, troops standing, in formation, and two fellows fell over. They were being carried out and another man fell down. And I mean, it just kept going like that. Sick men, 10 men fainted right there at the roll call. But college classes were to start that day. So they called a suspension of classes for an indefinite amount of time. And just before this had happened, the ladies of the town had pulled together and rented the old Fidelt house, which we see on the right there in the slide, for an infirmary. They had not quite finished all their work when flu cases started arriving. There were 120 cases of flu on campus altogether. No students died. The only casualty in the whole affair was a nurse, Ethel Newell, who was treating the patients. Now we are to 1926, and we have President Hopkins' inaugural. President Hopkins really was quite a reforming presidency at Wabash, really pulled us on into the 20th century. It's interesting to me that he was the first non-Presbyterian minister to serve as president. And this picture in the middle is actually both presidents Hopkins. So we had our president, Lewis Hopkins, and his brother Ernest was president of Dartmouth. And these are pictures from his inaugural. And this picture in the lower right shows the faculty in procession from Center Hall over to the gymnasium. So this is the mall area. And if you look, you can see the cars parked there on the mall. We certainly don't do that anymore. And I highlight the Dartmouth connection primarily for its impact on our architecture. This is a picture of the Pioneer Chapel under construction. And that would be in the 1920s. I want to say it was dedicated in 1928. And here we have a picture of the campus from the early 1930s. So you can see now we do have the Pioneer Chapel on the right. That is Forest Hall. And of course, the Armory and Gymnasium. What we don't have yet, you might notice, is Goodrich Hall. And here's the Dartmouth connection. So these two buildings, Goodrich and the Pioneer Chapel, are different from the other buildings on campus. They were both designed by Jens Frederick Larsen, an architect who had done quite a bit of work at Dartmouth. So I kind of imagine this, conversation between the brothers where, Wabash president says, well, we're getting together money. We're gonna build a chapel. Do you know any good architects? And Yeah, I'm sure that's an oversimplification, but I don't think it's an accident that we shared the same architect. And this picture in the upper left just kind of shows Goodrich just getting underway, and there's the construction building, bricks stacked for Goodrich there. In fact, Larson created an entire Wabash plan. This was just ahead of the centennial of Wabash. And of course, you know, nothing raises funds like a great big anniversary, and 100 was going to be a big one. And so here roughly was the plan for the Wabash of the future. This is a campus map, and my next slide will go into it quite a bit in detail. So here we have, so the solid black buildings were those that existed on campus in the late 1920s. The shaded buildings were all proposed buildings. I have red boxes around those buildings that were in fact built at some point or another. And so this is Goodrich. And of course, Sparks Center is not a Larson building, but built in that exact location. And this, of course, is the location of the library. This number 8 here was a dormitory quad envisioned by Larson. And these were, I want to say, were they science bit? One was languages and the other one was science. And here is the science building that Larson designed for Wabash College. We call it Goodrich, and it's named for Governor Goodrich, who was president of our board of trustees at the time and was distressed at the state of Wabash's financial affairs, you know, in the early 30s, basically the height of the Depression, and told President Hopkins if he could balance the budget, the college budget for 3 years straight, Goodrich would fund a Hall of Sciences. And boy, corners cut and corners just everywhere they could, but they did it and got their building. What's showing here in the red square is Larson's proposed dormitories, that quad I was showing you in the previous slide there just to the south. His plan for the library of the future was to take Old Andes, this center part here is Old Andes with a portico added and basically a Goodrich sized building on each end of it. And his plan was that would be both library and union. And of course, none of that came to fruition because in 1932, we really were in the middle of the Depression. And in the early, and so the fundraising was just not what they had hoped it to be. It was early 1940, I think maybe 41. Both President Hopkins and the president of the Board of Trustees, Governor Goodrich, died, both in the same year. And all of a sudden we would be having a new president and a new president of the Board of Trustees. Here we have Forest Hall. And as I said, it sat when Caleb Mills brought it to campus. He placed it about where the south end of the Sparks Center is now. This little circle, and again, I'm not sure how much you can see on the Zoom, but what that sign says is Scarlet Inn. So it was at this point, early 1920s, when there just wasn't, well, we didn't have a campus food service for one thing, and fraternity houses, typically cooks would have off on Sundays. And so an enterprising woman, local woman here in town, opened a sandwich shop and would deliver sandwiches out to students. And it was really quite a good idea. When she tired of the business, she sold it to two students who carried on with it, and I think made certainly their college expenses out of the deal. Picture in the lower right, you can see Forest has been spiffed up a little bit, coat of paint, much rehabbing, and it served in the late 1920s as dormitory housing for students. We have World War II and the Navy V-12 program. Wabash was one of the smallest colleges to land a Navy V-12 program. And I have to think it was not solely, but maybe in large part due to the connections that President Sparks had in Washington. In fact, he spent a bit of the war as in Washington, working administratively in the War Manpower Commission. It was a good thing we had a Navy V-12 program. President Sparks later in the war writes in a letter that the college was down to 12 regular students. As we can see here, these sailors, and this is the old Beta House. So the Navy men lived in all of the fraternity houses, were turned over for the duration of the war. And we thank Norwood Brigance for these beautiful color photographs, all taken from his Kodachrome slides, which are an amazing collection, all of their own, but very happy to have that. So often our history is pictured in black and white. I just think when we can have it in color, it somehow makes it just a little more real. After the war, we tear down Peck Hall and quickly build Waugh Hall. And one of the reasons that we had to get it done so quickly was with the money that was given to build Waugh was under a time restriction. And it was given in the 30s with the imperative to get it built by, certain time. Of course, the war came along and that was kind of pushed everything back. But by the time of the end of the war, they were really under the gun to get it done in time. And the middle picture, we can see Waugh Hall rising. And on the lower right, one more new addition to campus, and that is Mud Hollow. So this slide I call Wabash and the West Wing, simply because of the architect. So as I mentioned before, we had President Hopkins and Governor Goodrich both pass in the early 40s. Sparks becomes president, and Lee McCandless, a New York lawyer, class of 06, I think, 1906. And he was a real trackman athlete when he was here. And so president of the Board of Trustees chose the architect, new fellow, Eric Googler, who was a New York City architect. Googler is architecturally important. He was one of the founders of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and was FDR's personal architect, designed Roosevelt's Warm Springs Retreat, and also rebuilt the West Wing. One sort of thing that happened as a result of the New Deal expansion in government was they actually expanded the number of people that worked in and around the West Wing, and so more space was needed, and Googler did that. There are traces of Googler still in the White House today. There's a Steinway piano that he designed, very federal, with giant eagles on the legs. Anyway, it is a Googler Steinway. And Googler's papers are held by the White House archives as well. So close connections. The building that I'm showing in the upper right of this slide is also a Googler design, identical to our Sparks Center in every way, except it does not have the mezzanine level on top that we have. But this is the World War II United States Memorial Cemetery for the Battle of Anzio, people who died in the Battle of Anzio in Italy. Googler did a number of buildings on campus. So he did Sparks, Baxter, Wall Hall, that was his first building, and also did the Lilly Library and bits of the Allen Center, which we'll talk about. Again, what I'm showing here in the red circle is this sort of, it's kind of a Grecian key that covers those mezzanine windows. Also, if you stand in front of the circulation desk in the library upstairs and look straight up, you'll see the same design in the ceiling. That's, it looks very abstract, but is actually intertwined G's. So this is Googler branding each of his buildings. These pictures are really self-explanatory. This is the Sparks Center as it's being built. And especially, I love this, again, it's a Brigance picture in color. Here, this is the Tapey House as it's being pulled out of the mall down between the chapel and Goodrich. So there you go, house on wheels. This is the campus center as it looked when it was originally built. This part here in the upper left, of course, that's the fireplace. This is all now dining hall, but it was originally established as a kind of a living room campus in the campus center. This is President Sparks standing at his desk and looking across to the new campus center, which was never known as the Sparks Center until he had passed. This is a bowling alley, lower left. Later was known as the Little Giant Room. And of course, now it's the bookstore sale room where they put like clearance items and other bigger things. And if you ever wondered why that room was shaped like that, well, now we know it's because originally it was built as a bowling alley. And the pool hall here is now the current bookstore as well. This is Lilly Library as it was originally built, and we are looking toward the north end of it. And here, old-fashioned card catalogs and the circulation desk. Of course, that's now a coffee area. And I love this picture. This gives us a little bit of a sense of the colors that were used in the library. So red and yellow and green, all bright, really mid-century modern colors. And here's a close-up of up on the balcony. And a shot of the front doors. Some people might now recognize them as the doors that are on the front of the archives. And the transom is a window here in my office in the archive. So repurposed those tremendous brass doors. And here we are in the 1950s. We have up here toward the top, we have the Sparks Center, which was brand new construction. Lilly Library is just being built, just coming up out of the ground. And of course, Mud Hollow. And for those who might not know, Mud Hollow was veteran housing after World War II for those fellows on the GI Bill and their wives and any number of small children and the government would pay tuition, room and board, and all supplies and books for the vets. This slide of Forest Hall. So we saw Forest Hall where it originally came to campus, there on the site of the Sparks Center. But when it came time to build the Sparks Center, or the campus center as it was known at that time, they had to move it. So they moved Forest Hall. They built a basement, a walkout basement foundation south of South Hall, which is now, of course, south of Baxter Hall. And it is a kind of a campus services little flat roofed building in the parking lot down there. That actually was the basement of Forest Hall when it first moved. This is a picture of it in that location. And we can tell because right there we have the smokestack of the power plant. This picture at the bottom just tickles me no end. That is Forest Hall on the football field as it's being moved to its future home and last home so far, at the historic corner. This picture was taken by my father-in-law, Bill Swift, who looked out of his office and saw Forest moving across the football field very slowly, ran home, got his camera, and came back and got the picture. I just love that picture. Came time to, bring athletic facilities really into the 50s and 60s. This was a proposed design for a gymnasium, and Lee McCandless, no longer president of the Board of Trustees, but the same man who had brought Googler to campus, was so horrified by the thought of this design that he said, if you will put up a Googler design, I will support a good bit of the cost of the construction. And so he did. And here's a drawing of the McCandless Athletic Center as designed by McCandless's favorite architect, Eric Googler. One thing about this design, this is a swimming pool here, and these columns, this open area, that's still there because what they did when they built the Allen Center was they used the bones of the McCandless Center and then enlarged upon that. So this open area is actually that it's a sort of a glassed in. There are sofas and chairs there, and it looks out onto the football field. Here we have the mid to late 60s, and we can see the McCandless Center is under construction. Bill and Jenny Hayes have built their house, and there's their lovely swimming pool. Lots going on. And we get to this, which was a centerfold for the 1962 yearbook. We can see that the library is now complete. Up here in this area, again, I'm not sure how well you can see it. That is the Beta House, the new Beta House under construction. Forest Hall has not been moved yet. We still have it down here. We have no Baxter Hall yet. And we still have skylights on the gym. This is Mills Place. This would be the library. Everything in red here has been removed. The only house that is still here is Dr. Baird's house, and his son John lives there now. Originally, all of this area was Caleb Mills Orchard, and there was a pond. And, as you leave the library and walk down to this area, you really are walking downhill, easy enough to see how a pond could have been there. It was drained in the 1890s to build faculty houses, and that's what these had all been initially. This is the Humanities Center, which was dedicated in 1968. The way that it looked when it was built, it was greatly expanded, maybe doubled in the 1990s, and the whole complex is now known as the Fine Arts Center, but this is what it looked like originally with just the Ball Theater there. These are some aerial photographs of 1968. It gives us a pretty good look at upper left here at the McCandless Center and its new pool, the new stadium here, which came online in 1968. And also we can see that Mud Hollow has been dismantled and the baseball field built there in its place. This is a 1970s aerial, and really the way that the campus was for the next 20 years. There is one new building on this, and this is the Thomas Labs, which was added to Waugh Hall, and Thomas, again, named for Mason B. Thomas. We'll note in the gym that the skylights have now gone. That is so this is a post remodel photo of the gym. That project, the renovation of the gymnasium, was funded in the early 70s by Sheng Chadwick. And that, of course, is why we call it Chadwick Court. Sheng was an amazing basketball player who played on the 1922 national championship Wabash basketball team. So really, from its founding down to, today, still, Wabash is evolving. Change really is the only constant on campus. And so this is a shot of the mall before they redid the entry to center it, on. So you're looking, as you drive onto campus, you're looking right down at the chapel. We can see that a sidewalk here in front of the library was actually originally a street. We have cars, good cars parked there. And I just wanted to give a couple of contrasting pictures of the corner. So this is what Wabash looked like in the 1890s. And this would have been before the donation of these steps by the class 1898, I think. And of course, the iconic wooden sign there. That's about what I have for you tonight. If you're interested in more, I might invite you to follow Wally's Attic on Instagram. It's the account I post to most weeks. And also I have significantly more information on the Dear Old Wabash blog. The easiest way to find the blog on the website really is just to type in my name, search on Beth Swift, and it'll pop right up. And that's all I have. Thank you for inviting me tonight. That's it.
Sorry, Beth. We had one question asked in the okay. Chat. Somebody was wondering about the old wooden sign. What has become of it?
So there is a wooden. I want to say it is at the Carnegie Museum here in town. And I cannot remember the details of it, but it went away and was donated back to the Carnegie.
For those of you that may not know, the Carnegie
that's the
Museum
old library,
is the old public Crawfordsville Public Library on the
now
northeast corner of Wabash and Washington Street.
Right.
So we are past the time. We want to be mindful of everybody's evening. Want to thank you all for joining. If you do have additional questions, please send those to us at alumni@wabash.edu, and we'll pass those along to Beth and any other comments as well. Thank you, Beth. We appreciate your time and putting this together. And it's always neat to see the history of the college, and you do a fantastic job of illustrating that to us. One last thing for everyone, just be on the lookout for additional whenever, wherever Wabash events. And everybody have a great evening.